Welcome to the Hidden Door Breakthrough Experiences. Today, Anthony shares a series of vivid and deeply archetypal encounters within the realms of DMT, bringing them face to face with hyperdimensional entities that offered cosmic glimpses into other universes and powerful realizations. In their quest for truth, one humbling message stood out: now you know. Anthony's story is a dance between universal love, higher intelligences, and the playful mystery of existence. At the heart of it all is a reminder that even in the presence of the profound, life is also humorous. That this experience we call life is both sacred and fun.
What originally drew me to psychedelics and altered states of consciousness was my imagination and my youth just kind of running wild. I had a very extremely psychedelic experience the first time I smoked weed. It was way too much. I actually had what you would call a bad trip. I was shaking, I was just overwhelmed. And I'll never forget, I was looking up at the stars and I had kind of just like greened out. I wasn't really fully paying attention at this point. And I just remember coming to and seeing all the stars in the sky kind of shifting and melding around and kind of like in this like sine wave, sort of like moving in the sky. And I immediately panicked. It was actually kind of funny. Probably a little too young to smoke weed. I was like 14, 15. It was just a little too much. So this, after I got over it, I was able to kind of partake again here and there and not have that experience. And the experience I did have was very insightful, very mystical for me personally. That substance has always been more mystical. It's sort of dampened over the years, but early on it was extremely psychedelic for me. And as a result, I started to explore, what other ways does the mind change from these substances? And I was drawn to them, not in a, gimme, 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 fiendish sort of addict way. I was reverently chasing after the knowledge of these things. And I started to study esoteric and occult literature when I was about 17, 18, after some mystical experiences in my dreams, as well as just extreme synchronicities, deja vus, and things of that nature. So I wanted an explanation that expanded beyond religion. I was raised Catholic. I went through Catholic high school. That was the only Catholic school I went through. But it was enough for me to sort of get the gist and move on. So in that sort of wayward exile, self-exile from Catholicism, I sought meaning elsewhere. And that started in occult literature, alternative religions, some New Age things, but I was always more drawn to the ancient occult and things of that nature. I wasn't really as interested in New Age stuff, though some of it definitely did influence me at the time. I really just wanted answers about the nature of life. And the first psychedelic experience I had was with mushrooms, and it was with a good friend. And we had a grand old time, but I had an extreme body load. I looked like the Hunter S. Thompson on Ether part of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas for a good solid 2 hours, walking around looking like I was tripping over myself, but I promise you, was having a great time. And I remember laying down in the grass at some point and again staring at the stars, and that same effect that I experienced when I smoked weed for the first time happened to me again. But this time it was extremely euphoric. I felt so connected to everything, every blade of grass, every bug that was making a song in the air. I felt connected to every star I was looking at. And that oneness is what really, I think, piqued my interest and made me realize, okay, there is something greater to psychedelics that we are accessing as humans. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to just revere and respect and explore in a safe and, important way for your own good. And that was my first psychedelic experience. From there, I experimented with San Pedro cactus and other mescaline containing cactus strains. And I really particularly enjoy mescaline because there is something extremely directly cosmic within mescaline at a certain dose. It is inescapable to interact with something that feels like it extends beyond your consciousness. Something is interacting with you. And this was sort of my first foray into a more spiritual experience with psychedelics. That was, the mushrooms was sort of like dipping your toe in it, that cosmic oneness feeling. It was a glimpse. Mescaline was a direct, I am now interacting with something much older, much wiser, that knows more than me, and it's a part of me in these moments. I distinctly remember the mystical experience that was mescaline. And to sum it up, mescaline was speaking to me. I went into the woods at night. I interacted with a coyote that did not attack me or anything like that. But after that, I was lost in the woods at night after I had a pretty good, strong sense of direction. And I literally heard a voice that didn't sound like my inner voice telling me where to go. And it was completely right. I also noticed the feeling of a large sort of, imagine something that's 10 feet tall interacting with you. And it felt like something chasing me, not chasing me, but following me out of the woods, sort of like shooing me out of the woods. It felt like something that was knocking bushes over, very large, but there was nothing there. That was the strange kind of paranoid part about mescaline, and that was what sort of started to make me delve more into the spiritual path of psychedelics, because that made me a believer, not even a believer, just an experiencer. I had a direct experience with something that seemed to transcend our materialistic scientific explanation for what psychedelics are doing to you because of the nature of the integrated hallucinations I experienced. The first time I did DMT, years after all this experimentation, I was in college. Um, I was someone that people knew in my friend group that I had an interest in psychedelics, that I had experience with psychedelics. And while I was in school, I didn't do it a ton. There were times that, not to sound like a hipster, but I was like microdosing before it was cool, sort of thing. But I was doing little small amounts of LSD and mushrooms to enhance my vision. I had terrible vision before I got LASIK surgery years later, terrible vision. So I was in art school and I needed to draw from life. And I utilized small amounts of LSD and mushrooms to help attenuate my vision through my glasses. I couldn't even wear contacts at this point because my eyes were so bad. First time I smoked DMT, my friend came over to my house, and I'll never forget it. He was just sitting in my room, and he mentioned just offhand, "Oh man, I got some DMT." I said, "Oh man, I have read so much about DMT on Arrowhead. I've never done it." And he stopped me and he said, "Wait, wait, 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 wait. You have never done DMT." And I said, "Yeah, I've never had the opportunity to see it or get my hands on it." And he said, "Okay, we're just gonna get in my car. We're gonna go to my house. We're gonna do it right now." And I was like, "Right now?" He was like, we're just gonna go do it." So I go over to his house, and he has a nice glass bong that he packs a small amount of weed in the bottom, and he takes out the DMT. This DMT was not crystal; it was more almost like a tar, or like like it was like an oily sort of like putty substance. It's very interesting. I'll never forget. I smelled it. That it's the same smell that you know and love. and he puts them on there. And the three of us, one of his friends that I had just met, all sat in a circle, and we took hits from this DMT bowl out of this bong. And the first thing that I remember was the feeling was so overwhelmingly positive. It was transcendentally lovely in a way that I had never experienced before. Previous transcendental experiences on psychedelics, while euphoric and while astounding, were not as lovely as that feeling. And my closed eye visuals started to sort of coalesce. I started to see this sort of like 5D sort of like fabric of these different colors and triangles and geometry and things like that. And I was thinking the whole time, wow, this is so beautiful. And then without really fully understanding at first what I was seeing, but then eventually it came into my vision, ironically, I saw a sort of stained glass hyperdimensional outline of the Virgin Mary, which I thought was really interesting. Even in my head, while I was under the influence of this, I was thinking, wow, like this is a full on religious experience. And I remember the message being one of just, you are loved. This is what love is. Like basically the universe runs on love. And that beaming feeling I was experiencing sort of transitioned through the next couple of hits, and inevitably it became this sort of overwhelming goddess experience. And I threw my head back because I was just so overwhelmed. My body was essentially limp at this point. And I'll never forget seeing what looked like, and I wasn't super familiar with Hinduism at the time. Personally, I ended up exploring it after this, but this massive cosmos-sized goddess entity was essentially this, and she was pixelated and crazy geometry. Like it was not a straight outline of a form. It was clearly this very higher dimensional feeling thing. And she was essentially dancing on my face. Her feet were just kind of stamping my face, but it wasn't painful and it wasn't scary. It was more astonishing. It was more like, how can my brain even comprehend what I'm looking at right now? Because I did sort of comprehend it, but it was still just extremely over the top. And afterwards, we sort of came together, and um, we helped each other visualize sacred geometry like a Merkaba. And it kind of showed me the power of it in the sense that once I was coming down, if I was able to focus, I was able to envision things super clearly in my closed eye visuals, which I thought was extremely interesting. That archetypal experience felt like it went on for an infinite amount of time. There was no time frame. The only thing that took me out of it was the fact that there were other people in the room. Um, but while I was in that state, while my eyes were closed, time was completely irrelevant. It was a moment of eternity or infinity or whatever you want to call it. Like that moment, what echoed forever is what it felt like. And yeah, I mean, the main thing that it taught me was love is extremely important. It's the substrate on which the universe functions, which contradicts so much of our reality. We look around and we see how the world operates, and I have never in real life experienced something so uniquely cosmically lovely, um, other than DMT experiences. I find interesting. Perhaps in Eastern cultures that rely more on meditation and introspection, perhaps they can naturally achieve that experience and that feeling. But for me, at least at the time, it was not achievable other than through a substance as powerful as DMT. And in that moment, I realized that there was something on the other side of the veil in that way. Whether or not my brain was conjuring these things as a person that was raised Catholic was irrelevant to the fact that the direct experience, and in no way did it make me like, return to Catholicism or anything like that. It just gave me an even broader appreciation for archetypal mysteries of that nature, which I think is something that is invaluable. You can't really, it's priceless. You can't put a price on a direct experience that helps you transcend the feeling of, what's the word I'm looking for? The discriminating mind that will say, my truth is the real truth. It made it more like, no, it's okay for you to experience a direct experience of cosmic love with the Virgin Mary and the goddess Kali in the same breath. There's no delineation, there's no separation. These things all exist in a similar liminal space, and when you access it, whether or not it's the subconscious and unconscious DNA-based memory system that we have as a species, or whatever it does, however you want to split the hairs to explain this away, the experience speaks for itself for the individual, which no one can explain away, take away from you, rationalize or derationalize. It just is an experience. And I feel like for me, it just opened up my ability to not be bound to one set of things, one idea. It made me, if anything, more curious. It broadened my horizons of the things I wanted to search for in life, which is direct contact with these sorts of archetypes and feelings. In terms of integration afterwards, I have since had probably several dozen DMT experiences that ranged in a variety of ways. Um, but I would say that the most formative ones that made me feel like I was interacting with things that were intelligent was two specific experiences. Still in college, I smoked some DMT with my roommate, and I experienced, and I was only, my eyes were only closed for probably less than 3 minutes. But in that 3 minutes, I saw two, again, this sort of stained glass, geometric, hyperdimensional, multicolored sort of fabric. Out of it was these two, the bell dresses from like Victorian area, like two bell dress wearing women, entities. And they were pointing at me, and kind of one was elbowing the other, and then they were both sort of giggling, like they were pointing at me and laughing. And I was, even with my eyes closed, I was kind of making a face like, what is happening right now? And sure enough, one of them moved close to me, and it was startling because there was dimensionality to it. It feels like it filled the room, feels like it filled my vision, even though my eyes were closed. It was very close to me now. It was right in front of my face, and it started to rub its hands together, and I heard the voice of this thing saying the words, "It's very, very sacred." And as she rubbed her hands together, there was this vortex forming in her hands, and I was completely mesmerized by this. I was staring at what she was showing me because it was so incredibly beautiful. And then she sort of kept repeating this mantra, "It's very, very sacred. It's very, very sacred." And then she opened her hands up, and in her hand was this lotus flower that was, every petal was like a window into another universe or another dimension. Every petal was like a doorway, and she was just showing this to me. And again, it was like glossolalia. Like I could not form words. I could not find a way to describe the immense beauty and experience of that. But I remember it so distinctly because it felt like something was interacting with me. And then at the end, she kind of whisked it back into her hands and kind of like took a few steps back and said, now you know. And this is something that from that point forward, whenever I interacted with certain entities, that was the final message, which I find really interesting. Now, and now you know. It was just, it's very matter of fact. There's no mincing words. That is the message. Now you know. And the time after that that comes to mind, I, interestingly enough, smoked with two people who consider themselves atheists, which I would not consider myself an atheist by any means. I don't really know how to categorize what I think or believe or my hunch, but the idea that there is absolutely nothing to higher dimensional life, to non physical life, to the nature of the universe being only physical and material, and what we see is what we get, I wholeheartily reject that. So I found it interesting to smoke DMT with them. And sure enough, first guy smokes DMT, he doesn't really see much. He saw almost what he described as like a just a line in his vision, and out of one side of the line, a bunch of stuff was like spilling out, like wispy geometric craziness. And then the other guy just said he just saw geometry, so everything was just this like incredible sort of lattice of geometry that he was seeing. Those were their two experiences, and then I smoked it last. And when I smoked it, I saw no geometry at first. It was almost a blank canvas, sort of like what you see when you close your eyes with no psychedelics. And in the very distance of my closed eye vision, I could see something on what you would call whatever the horizon is of this space. And I saw this speck, and I was like staring at it because I was like, what is that? Why is that forming? And then it sort of started to zoom towards my vision. Once again, this startled me a little bit. Much like the bell dress ladies, it's very three-dimensional, where it goes from super far away to right up in the room with you. And I'll never forget this gigantic living Yggdrasil type tree just sort of arrived, and it was fully conscious. There was in its roots were these like beings, these sort of like root humanoid root beings that had these like orbs of light that they were cultivating with their hands. And the tree itself was this very conscious entity, almost playful, much like the bell dress ladies. They were very playful, and so is this. And it was just kind of waving there, and it was so beautiful, super super high detail. I mean, I could see the leaves, I could see the trunk, I could see, but it was all this like purple and red and blue and neon, and it was extremely colorful. And I remember it reached one of its branches out. And mind you, I'm in my room with my eyes closed, sitting in a chair, giggling because of how just absurd this feels. It just feels so like cartoonish. And when it reaches its branch out, it kind of puts the branch on my head, and it starts to almost make me do a circle in my seat, sort of like a meditating sort of circle. This very like calming sort of meditation style. I don't know what you would call it. It was just sort of this very subtle circular movement, like it was rubbing my head essentially, like a pet. Is kind of what the relationship felt like in this moment. It felt like this insanely ancient cosmic archetype of immense knowledge and wisdom, and I was like this, you know, drooling infantile sort of baby entity that was just in awe of its presence. And after it was done petting, it just sort of like waved goodbye and said once again, now you know. And in that moment, I was just sort of like, what do I know now? Because I have more questions than I have answers. How is this possible? I just smoked this with two people, same dosage, that had no such experience. And I had this extremely archetypal experience with a form of an entity. I mean, Yggdrasil, it's like the tree of life is sure, it transcends cultures, and it's a universally sort of recognized uh, subject. But I didn't really at the time have a huge connection to Nordic related mythologies. Of course, after this, I was extremely interested, and maybe that was the point. Maybe there was something for me to learn, and so therefore, that's why I interacted with it. But those two experiences in particular, and keep in mind, there's a myriad of others, but those two in particular were the most standout. I could not believe my eyes, literally, because and if you try to explain to someone who doesn't believe in these sorts of things what you saw, they're not really, they look at you like crazy. They don't really believe you. And it's like, how can I make this up? This is all very specific, right? Um, and I think that the main thing that occurred afterwards was just the general sort of trend in life um, towards the knowledge of human consciousness, the universe, and the occult and things of that nature. And as a result, I have very much so kind of matured into these things and have since explored 5-MeO, which 5-MeO is mostly fully body. The first time I did enough of it to fully sort of vaporize myself, I saw these kind of 2D sheets with these kind of crystal spirals that were all kind of spreading out from the spiraling center sort of spine. And I remember thinking, like, this is so like elvish. This is so uh, ancient feeling. These are like Fibonacci sequences and stuff. Sure enough, the next day, and these are the types of synchronicities that I pay attention to. But the next day, I saw an image on Reddit of somebody who had used a glass bong for DMT exclusively for a long time, and on the glass, the DMT had formed these exact, and when I say exact, I mean, when I saw the picture, my jaw dropped because it was the exact same pattern that I saw in my closed eye visuals when I smoked 5-MeO. And 5-MeO, interestingly enough, at least in my experience so far, there is no visuals. There is no direct experience of interaction with anything archetypal or specific. It is more just a general experience of oneness and bliss that you can experience on other psychedelics. But I feel like that's the most direct access route. But I found it very interesting that 5-MeO and conventional NN-DMT have such different effects on consciousness in that way. Feeling is very familiar, but the result is completely different, at least in my experience. The way that this experience shaped how I viewed reality is quite simple. I was already someone who had a hunch that the nature of this and the universe and our experience of the universe, our bodies, our brains, the very structure of everything from the quantum world and the subatomic world, all the way up through the cosmic world of galaxies and quasars, biggest to the smallest, at least to me, intuitively, appear to resemble some form of a hologram. And I can't prove it. It's a very difficult thing to test, but you zoom out or zoom in far enough, and things start to behave in a very holographic manner. Um, Not to get into specifics, but I have read books on the subject, and in my own experience, it seems to check out. Um, but practices and perspectives that helped me stay grounded and connected to my reality since then is just the that now you know sort of message echoes in the back of my mind. I don't have to prove anything. My experience is enough for me, and I have had plenty of experiences with absolutely no substances involved that anyone with any sort of open mindedness would call it a religious or mystical experience. So maybe I am just predisposed to that current of reality, and therefore I have a bias. I'm not against admitting that in any way. But I think the very much so sort of like acceptance of these things and the realness of them in my experience is what helped me sort of maintain my ground and just nothing really shocks me or surprises me about this reality because the astonishing levels of insight that I've gained from the reality that has been imbued by DMT sort of makes the surprises of this reality seem predictable, derivative, those sorts of words come to mind. And so I have just sort of accepted that the universe is very strange and my experience of it is very unique, and that's okay. And I don't have to prove anything, I just have to accept it. And accepting the mystery and the idea that there are things that we can never fully understand, but we can experience is the overarching lesson that I think DMT has taught me over the years. I think these experiences are showing us what Jung and by other names and ideas has been referred to for many, many hundreds of years as the collective unconscious. I think Rupert Sheldrake refers to it as morphic resonance. I really like what Sheldrake is getting at in that sense. But that collective unconscious is a transcendental, universal, timeless thing that I think extends far beyond even just the human DNA memory based experience. I think it is lending itself to the holographic model, sort of the storage unit or the storage device for all of our ideas, all of our higher concepts, our gods, our devils, all those things exist in this sort of unconscious liminal space where they are both as real as they are unreal or not real. They are as imaginal as they are something that can perhaps draw us to physical decisions and things like that that can alter our reality, particularly through the occult, through these sorts of practices, as well as DMT. And I think that what it's telling us about ourselves is how powerful we are and how we have been disempowered by the prejudice and discriminating minds' incapacity to accept that the human experience has been attenuated and imbued with molecular chemical enhancements since the dawn of time. And any ideology or anything that prevents us from accepting that, and it's not about your opinion on it, it's about accepting the truth that that has been the case for an extremely long time and still in many tribal cultures is the case currently, that experience, that direct experience being wrenched out of the hands of the common people and um, let's say made only available to a priest class or what have you, however you want to look at it, or made illegal by government, however you want to look at it. By doing that, and by us as a species not saying, hey, we deserve the right to explore these things because this is a potential doorway to direct access to things that are transcendental and therefore eternal, or ideas, or feelings, or therapies and healing, the fact that we live in a world where well over 90% of the world has not experienced these things, many of them don't know about them, and many others fear them, criminalize them, demonize them, and turn them into taboos. That is the insight that I feel like we need to learn, that is something we need to get over, that it needs to be okay to talk about these things, to explore these things in a safe and manner that doesn't endanger people. The outlaw mentality that has had to surround substance exploration is what is the endangering aspect of it. And I'm very grateful that we are now seeing the advent of psychedelic therapies, of the exploration of research chemicals by Alexander Shulgin, among others, and that we aren't afraid anymore. I think that fear sort of was the lock and key that kept us out of so much insight that could have saved a lot of lives and helped a lot of people overcome the oppressive and extremely authoritarian ideologies that have prevented people from feeling like they are allowed to have direct access to these experiences. And if there was one message that I could share with the world about my experience, the one thing that I would sum up my psychedelic experiences is you have to have fun in life. We have turned these things into these puritanical, grave, and I'm not saying don't revere these things. Of course not. I'm not saying don't respect these things. Respect and fun are not mutually exclusive. But to turn them into this or that or the other thing, instead of allowing them to exist in a space where we encourage the safe and mindful use of these things, is better than saying no one should do it. And I think the experiences I have had that have shaped my experience of life and reality are something that cannot be traded, they cannot be taken from me. They are not transactional. There is nothing about them that could in any way, shape, or form be dampened while I am conscious and alive. And that is something that scares people that want to control others. Because at the end of the day, once I know these things, and once again, that message of, and now you know, once I know these things and have direct experiences of them, there's absolutely nothing anyone can do to take it away from me. Unless they, discover the Men in Black and mind eraser thing. Other than that, there's literally nothing that can stop me from remembering the insights and the feelings and the experience that I've had with these things. And that is what I would want to share with everyone is don't be afraid to explore these things in a safe manner that is reverent, but also have a little bit of fun with it. Don't take it too seriously, because when you try to grip it too much, it slips through your fingers. You have to be able to let the magic exist in the space it's in. The most memorable experiences I've had on these substances were always sort of like the cosmic joke, that sort of ecstatic giggling and sort of like elbowing you in the ribs. How funny is this? That is something that I think everyone needs. And maybe it's because I'm a jester at heart or something like that I feel connected to these kinds of ideas. But I do think that is the one thing, if I could imbue someone with, it's you have to be able to let loose a little bit. You have to loosen up. You have to be able to have fun, because there is so much insight in the ability to laugh at how messy all this is and how goofy it is that when you smoke DMT, you're literally like a puddle on the ground. There's something very funny about that. And I think that the more people can laugh at themselves and laugh at the mind-blowing experiences that they experience in these states, I think that's all for the better. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to today's breakthrough experience. If you'd like to support The Hidden Door, please share this with someone you think would benefit from listening to it. If you have a story you'd like to share, please reach out to thehiddendoorpodcast@gmail.com.